That is not what Keir Starmer stands for. It's not what the Labour Party stands for.
It's not very statesmanlike, is it? I think there was a stronger defence he could have made.
Got massive pushback, like this was not the intention. So it was a cock-up. Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
We're back. I'm back. I missed you all last week, ladies. But it's sunny outside. I've got my phone back. All is right in the world. And I feel like I got a nice slice of you because we were out at the BAFTAs, baby. We had some proper fun pretending we were the glitterati.
I thought we all looked fab. There was celebrities everywhere. But the other thing, and I know this is a bit cheesy, but I just felt it was a great night for British television. I spend a lot of the time sitting on my sofa watching television, and all those clips just reminded me how incredible that industry is. And each time they nominated 6 things, I thought, how are they going to choose? They're all bloody brilliant. So I thought it was a great night for British television and a great night for us.
Harriet, you literally went from political animal to party animal, didn't you? Loved it. But also, the other thing that was funny about the day was we were wearing, all of us, these killer heels. Actually, Ruth, you were wearing boots. And I sort of realised about half an hour in that I was not going to be able to survive the night in these heels. I've got marathon toes here. I'm not.
We had to put makeup on your feet because they're so ripped to shreds.
Makeup on my feet. Anyway, so Harriet and I ended up with our white trainers and our shoes in like little plastic bags. So I spent the evening with my shoes tucked under my arm in a plastic bag. Oh, the glamour! But Harriet, you left your shoes at the BAFTAs. There's a pair of Harriet Harman shoes.
I had such a giggle, but I had this one moment of clarity when we were there where I just thought to myself, I wonder, when was the last time I presented an award to something, through work? And I was going, oh yeah, it was a best in breed at a minor agricultural show in Scotland. And I thought, oh, that's a bit different from the BAFTAs, isn't it? That's not our only big night out in London, ladies. We've got another one coming up next week. 2 come along like buses.
Yeah, you are right. That was one night out, but we've got another big night out because on Tuesday, which is the 20th of May next week, it's our live show and there's a few tickets left.
Yeah, it's going to be brilliant. So not only do you get to hang out with us and then see the difference between us in the first half and then after we've had gin and tonics at half time in the second half, but we've also got Armando Iannucci, Scotland's finest, the world's greatest satirist, the thick of it, Veep, in the loop, the whole 9 yards. He's coming. He'll be answering all your questions. So for all of the details and to get those, we've literally got half a dozen tickets left. But if you want to get your hands on them, go to aegpresents.co.uk.
Okay, and look, let's get on with today and explain what we're going to be talking about. The Prime Minister, is he falling out with his MPs again? There was a big immigration white paper published on Monday. It was about trying to drive down legal migration numbers. Do you know they hit 2.4 million visas issued in the 3 years to June 2024, far higher levels than when we had freedom of movement and members of the European Union. So the government now trying to drive down those figures. But this whole debate being overshadowed by some of the language the Prime Minister used in his speech echoes, critics would say, of Enoch Powell and his infamous Rivers of Blood speech back in the 1960s when there was a big debate raging in the UK about immigration and race relations. So we're going to talk about that, and also assisted dying. It has been passed in Scotland. It's back in the Commons this week. So we're going to explain, we're going to do a bit of an explainer on the law across all of the UK. Another week, another fallout between the Prime Minister and some of his Labour MPs. We've talked a lot, haven't we, about unhappiness around the winter fuel allowance, around disability benefit cuts. But now he's fallen out again with a number of his MPs and leading figures within the Labour Party criticise him over his language around immigration. So look, There was a big speech made at Number 10 on Monday morning by the Prime Minister, flanked by his Chancellor was there, his Home Secretary was there. Let's hear what he had to say.
Nations depend on rules, fair rules. Sometimes they're written down, often they're not. But either way, they give shape to our values, guide us towards our rights, of course, but also our responsibilities, the obligations we owe to each other. Now, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together.
In that speech, he's talking about the need for community cohesion and that coming out of step if there is too much immigration for a country to absorb and communities to absorb. But the language in there where he talked about becoming an island of strangers was seized upon because it echoed language used by Enoch Powell in the infamous Rivers of Blood speech, where he said a future multicultural Britain could be one where white people, and this is to quote Enoch Powell from 1968, found themselves made strangers in their own country. And what this did was it blew up in Westminster and beyond, saying that the Prime Minister was evoking this sort of language in order to appeal to certain groups of voters, and what on earth was he doing, and how controversial that became. Ruth, what did you make of the speech?
As you know, I've struggled quite a lot, particularly with my own side, in fact, in terms of some of the way and the language that's been used regarding immigration. I wouldn't vote for any of the stuff about the Rwandan deal. I publicly criticised Priti Patel with some of the language that she used. When you've got words like hordes being used and things like that, I mean, I really struggle. And I do think that there is a line between how politicians frame this debate, and it is a debate, and we shouldn't be shutting people down. That, you know, this is definitely a policy issue. It needs discussed, it needs dissected, and it needs to come to some form of kind of consensus among the country about what migration is for and who's allowed to come and what controls there should be. I get all of that, but there is definitely a through line between the sort of language and framing that is used and behaviour of people and what they think is acceptable, and the way in which they treat other people within their own communities. I think Labour's got a tough job because there has always seemed to me quite a big difference in the view of immigration within the party to even have a party consensus before you try and lead the country in a consensus. But Starmer's messaging has been all over the place. Now, there's some stuff I want to say about how he's changed his tune and how you go on a journey, but I think if you take that speech in isolation, I mean, I think they'll probably have been quite shocked by the blowback because I don't think they saw it coming.
There was a speech that the Prime Minister did in Downing Street, and I remember it, and it was at the end of January after the inquiry into the Southport riots, where he talked about the need to not create divisions in society and not to demonise migrants and to come together as communities. And it just really jarred with me that the language that he was using. Let's play a bit of what he was saying in January.
They chose to come together. They chose to pick up the pieces of their lives. They chose to rebuild, brick by brick, side by side. Strangers no longer strangers, a community. This country has no shortage of empathy for the people of Southport. I know that. But in the face of such darkness and tragedy, what we really should do is follow their example. That is what we need to face this new threat. But also something more. Because national renewal isn't just about public services or the economy. It's about turning us back towards ourselves.
It's really interesting, Harriet, because, you know, I did a little bit of digging into this because when I saw the stuff on Tuesday, saw the backlash Monday into Tuesday, I messaged a few people in Downing Street and said, are you trying to be Are you trying to sort of signal over the heads of some of your MPs to voters that you understand their concerns on immigration and you're happy to use language that maybe your MPs don't like, but maybe voters don't mind? And actually the polling suggests that voters are comfortable with this language. And I got massive pushback, like this was not the intention. So it was a cock up.
It wasn't just the speech. He was announcing a white paper which sets out all the things the government's going to do. And the things that the government is going to do on immigration, I think, command a wide consensus. For example, as he said, clamping down on the gangs, working internationally, getting rid of foreign offenders who should be in their own country, back in their own country, not in our prisons. And actually more than 10% of people in our prison are foreign national offenders. And people really don't like the idea at all. I don't like the idea at all of people coming here and then committing offences. I don't think he's changed his tune in that. If you look at his CBI speech in 2022, he said exactly that about business and indeed also social care, weaning itself off, always bringing in people from abroad and not training up people who are here. So the 2022 speech to the CBI set out exactly what he's now doing in government in the white paper. Then we get to the language. Now, I think that it can be read as a kind of communitarian thing. We need to be neighbours, not strangers. And actually, if you have, like Shabana Mahmood did later on in that day, say that if you added those two words, neighbours, not strangers, you actually get what the Prime Minister was getting at, that we need to celebrate our diverse country, but there needs to be integration. Otherwise, we will be strangers, not neighbours. So I think that some people have thought, oh dear, does this evoke Enoch Powell, and felt uncomfortable about it. But others are just stirring it up because they are leftist critics of the government, and some of them are doing it not in good faith. I happen to believe that I just cannot envisage at all, and also they're absolutely downright adamant in Number 10 in the Home Office, that they are appalled by the suggestion that they should be deliberately trying to evoke Enoch Powell's speech. That speech was an absolutely terrible speech, which talked about the black man having the whip hand over the white man. It was the most appalling thing. That is not what Keir Starmer stands for. It's not what the Labour Party stands for. And so I think that they feel appalled by that.
I just don't believe it. I mean, I completely believe they didn't do it on purpose. I completely think that was a bit of language that got into the speech that nobody had checked and they didn't realise that it was in there. But in terms of all of the stuff that every single cabinet minister and every single backbencher is joining hands and singing Kumbaya and thinking this is amazing, I think is for the birds. I absolutely do.
No,
I think some of the concerns are genuine at the way at what this is. And I think the difficulty that the Labour Party has is that Keir Starmer repeatedly has talked about how nobody's making the case for positive immigration and it needs to be made. Talks about, there's loads of stuff that he said in the past about how it is a fundamental good, that it's good for Britain, all the rest of it. And then, there's a council election, Reform do quite well, and then suddenly he drops this big stinker on the table.
I think it's not just about Reform getting extra votes. It's about a sense that you have to listen to people and you have to understand where they're at. And people want him to be saying, we are going to have a control over immigration and we're going to stop depending on foreign labour imported, and we're going to stop having foreign nationals coming here and committing offences.
Immigration has been in the top 5 concerns of this country for at least 5 years. And the only difference that I can see from what Keir Starmer was saying when he was trying to get elected as the Labour Party leader to what he was saying in opposition to what he's saying now. So the difference in, for the last 4.5 years up until 6 months ago, and then what's happened, this week, the only difference I can see is the rise of Reform.
Like, there has definitely been a shift in the mood of the country in terms of immigration. And there was outright fury, I would say, from voters in the run-up to the last election when they looked record immigration levels and the spike in immigration under the Conservative government after Brexit, and they changed the rules around immigration and a points-based system. And I think in 1 year, 900,000 people were issued visas. So I was saying 2.4 million in the 3 years to June 2024. But there has been criticism about whether you argue whether Keir Starmer has now put the Labour Party in the place where it's responding to what voters would want or not. I mean, there has been criticism about what he has said in the past to what he is saying now. And at Prime Minister's questions, Liz Savile-Roberts from Plaid Cymru and the PM really got into quite an unpleasant spat over it.
This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker.
He really went for Liz
It's not very
personally.
statesman-like, is it? I think there was a stronger defence he could have made of his own position there. But yeah, I think he's in trouble. You know, he does struggle to imprint on the idea on the public out there that he is a man of principle that sticks with his principles, and that's a really hard thing if you lose that idea. If you get the reputation of somebody whose whose opinions twist in the wind, it's really hard to get that sense of constancy back.
I think that the comparison for him personally with that Enoch Powell speech, I really think that got to him, not least because of how he had tried to discuss the Southport riots with the country. I don't think it's where he believes he is as a human. And I think that he was very brittle with Liz Savile-Roberts, partly because it was the defensiveness of feeling that something had gone into a speech that you didn't intend. I mean, the whole argument from Number 10 to me was that he was trying to channel Roy Jenkins, the famous former Labour Home Secretary that had talked about cohesion and immigration being a good thing for the country, but it had to be done in a way that the population could sustain. So that was what he wanted to get across. And then what he actually got across was something that left him being compared with Enoch Powell.
I think in response to Liz Savile-Roberts, he should have actually explained, look, this is what we're getting at. It's a communitarian message. It's about neighbourliness. It's about integration. And he should have done that and reassured her and explained rather than just slapping her down. I just think to call across the chamber, you're rubbish. I think a Prime Minister has the opportunity to be a bit more magisterial than that. And of course, I've been that woman standing there asking the Prime Minister a heartfelt and serious question and had the Prime Minister say, you're rubbish. So I kind of went, ouch, at that point, because I've been in that situation myself. And I think, you know, he should have... People do want an explanation, and he's got an explanation, and he should have done that rather than hit at the messenger.
I actually think that he should not be fronting this stuff up himself. I think he should be letting Yvette Cooper front it up. She's been far more consistent on this than he is, and if this is the future direction that the government's going to go in. But also, it's almost a policy area where they can't succeed. So that in the run up to the election, their take on it was they wanted to smash the gangs, and that got them away from talking about numbers. But with that one speech, he's almost so completely ceded the ground to reform and is refusing to make. And this is quite an important part. Part of the argument for immigration in the past has always been the economic argument. This idea that if you are, particularly in the West, particularly in a mature Western democracy where birth rates are low and you've got an ageing population, part of your idea of growth rates for the country has always been about having a workforce age, sort of inbound migration, which will help supplement your workforce and will help growth of the country. And there is, as part of this, there's been a dismantling of this idea that that's accepted fact. So if it stops being part of an economic argument as well, and nobody's going to make that case, you're ceding further the ground onto reform's idea, which is basically, to parse, we just don't want you here. And that migration, both legal and illegal, is somehow bad in and of itself rather than somehow good in and of itself. And if you get onto that, it is very, very easy for reform to keep outflanking you from the right and keep saying it's not enough, you must have fewer people and fewer people and fewer people, and you're failing us, and you're handing out too many visas, and there's too many people coming across the channel, and you haven't stopped. And I think, actually, if I was advising Keir Starmer, I would say, look, this is a policy area where you can slightly lower the temperature, you can maybe neutralise the criticism, but you'll never eradicate it, and you'll never win against reform because you'll never offer less than them, and that is what that is the zero-sum game that they're going after. So hand it over to Yvette Cooper, who's senior, who can handle herself, who's got a bit more of a track record of this. Let her be the face of that, and you do some of the more positive announcements for the government.
There's an inauthenticity question around this, and
100%.
Harriet, I don't disagree that I think maybe he has shifted position over the years, right? Okay. But the point is, he was the guy that fronted up the second referendum. He has spoken very clearly about being pro-freedom of movement. And so I think it does raise this question around Keir Starmer about authenticity with voters that, have doubts about him. But it's very interesting, this economic argument, because as you said, Ruth, part of the advantage of immigration is the OBR forecast it in as being good for the economy, and it gives the Chancellor more headroom. So the more immigration you have, the more headroom, the more your economic forecasts look good, the more you have to spend. But what? And
that's the bit why I winced, actually, wasn't necessarily immediately at the Island of Strangers bit, because I actually didn't connect that myself with the speech. I mean, it does echo the Rivers of Blood speech, but it wasn't in my lexicon, it wasn't in my knowledge, in the same way as I don't think it was in the speechwriter's knowledge. But the bit that I really went at was when he was talking about importing cheap foreign labour and that sort of thing. And this idea that we have a productivity problem, actually having young working age adults coming to the country who are motivated enough to leave their home country to come here to try and work, in terms of a lot of the people that are applying for visas that are working visas in order to move to the UK in order to work in areas where we've got shortages, is actually something that it really helps in terms of the growth story that the government wants to do. And if you take that away, if you say that that doesn't impact the growth rates here, it doesn't sort of bolster some of the productivity problems we have here. If you destroy that consensus, then actually I kind of don't know where we go in economic terms from that.
What's really interesting, though, is when you, and this is something I think is going to be debated more around this, because when you actually talk to those within government, they are beginning to raise questions about this economic orthodoxy, if you like. Someone pointed out to me and said, if you have 2.4 million people arriving in the country over a time period where you've built 600,000 additional homes, then you get these tensions between a battle for resources, and that tends to happen at the lower end of the market. Or you import cheap labour, and then it doesn't motivate companies to push up wages, and then therefore that affects your productivity. So I think we're going to get into more of a debate about what are some of the problems of immigration that we don't necessarily factor in when making these assessments. Or certainly I think that's where, because Ruth, what you've just talked about, that is the kind of consensus view of economists, and I think the government are trying
and economists don't ever reach a consensus. That's the thing that's quite amusing about that. You can have 15 economists and you'll have 22 different views, but it has been the orthodoxy for a long time.
I think it does raise more questions for the responsibility of government, because if you have lent on foreign students to prop up your higher education system in order for the government not to pay so much for the higher education, if you've lent on foreign care workers in order to have them being lower paid than you might needed to pay people who are already living here to be care workers, if you're actually relying on people to come into work in businesses and you're not having to train them, then actually, if you take away those people coming from abroad, there's more call on the state to finance those things. So I think it puts more pressure on the economy that will be needed to respond to. They've already talked about the fair pay agreement for social care workers. That will need to be substantial in order to compensate for those care workers that are not going to be coming in. There's a big question about universities, many of whom are in deficit already. How are they going to manage without foreign students unless they have extra money from the government? And of course, business is going to need to invest in training if we can't just depend on people who've been trained abroad. So it does throw ahead to the public spending statement.
But also, Harriet, if you don't allow care workers in and councils therefore have to pay more for care work, who pays that? The taxpayer pays that. So there are going to be inevitably, I think, tussles between the Home Secretary and the Chancellor over all of this. But it is so interesting that I think that the broad mainstream consensus now has shifted away from making arguments, positive arguments about migration to something quite different, which I think all the parties are now doing. But of course, within the Labour movement and the Labour Party, and also voters, progressive voters to the left, that Labour do actually still need to keep on board. It has been extremely controversial. But look, we're going to have to go to a break. When we're back, we're going to explain a bit about what's happening on the assisted dying legislation this week, with a bit of a tour around the British Isles, and I'll give you a little bit about an upcoming EU UK summit. There's a big kind of EU UK loving on its way next week.
For the eagle-eyed amongst you that might be watching us on YouTube rather than just listening on your headset, you will have noticed that the background for Harriet and Beth has changed. Bit of a mix-up in terms of bookings today. So out of the place where we usually record our podcast, and in what looks like a back end of a gym hall, Beth.
I'd rather call it the ED bunker.
Oh, nice. Yeah. The underground bunker. Love it.
Anyway, so we're in the ED bunker. We've relocated. I quite like it in here, though. It's very peaceful. I might just stay in here forever. No one can get me, can't find me. Nondescript room.
Well, actually, in terms
Peaceful.
of nondescript rooms, Beth, you've been ferreting out information from nondescript rooms and nondescript people.
Oh, yes,
we mentioned it just before the break there, about the EU UK summit. And this is another one that Keir Starmer's hosting. It's coming to Britain. What have you been able to ferret out for us?
Yeah, so look, next Monday, the great and good of the European Union are coming to the UK for this big summit, and it has been trailed for weeks as a big reset moment for the UK and the EU. And you've got to put it in the context, if you like, of the India deal and then the US agreement. I'm not going to call it a trade deal, the US thing, because it was a tariff deal, but it was still, a significant moment in which the Prime Minister managed to land something that other countries so far haven't. And then on Monday, we're going to have this big summit with the EU leaders. So we're going to have Ursula von der Leyen and the all of the leaders of the European Union coming over to the UK. And the reason it matters and the reason it's going to be a big deal is you might remember a little while ago that in the light of the US saying it didn't want to support militarily Ukraine in the way that perhaps Biden had under Trump, and the European Union realised it needed to step up defence, and it created that €150 billion fund to procure more defence across the European Union. I think what's going to happen on Monday is the UK government are going to sign a security and defence partnership with the European Union, and that will enable British companies to bid for that money. So that is going to be hailed as a big win for the government. And then on trade, there has been a lot of debate around animal products and natural products. And is there going to be a deal where the UK aligns with EU regulations around these products in order to reduce trade barriers? Where I think there's a couple of sticking points, and it comes back to the immigration question, is what the European Union really want is this youth mobility scheme, whereby young people in the UK and the European Union can go in between each other's countries, stay for a limited amount of time, and those people are not kind of counted in migration figures because they're temporary visas. The European Union really want to get this going. And then the final thing, and I'm sorry, this is a long soliloquy from me, fishing. And the EU wanted to have a 10-year deal where the agreements made under Brexit to allow European countries to fish in UK waters were extended, and I don't think the UK government are going to do it for that long. So I think actually, from a UK perspective, they're probably going to be able to come out and say they've had quite a few wins from the European Union.
If there's a deal done on fishing that looks like it's giving away some fishing rights for British fishermen, but mostly Scottish fishermen in the northeast, that's going to really, really harm Labour. But in terms of just the absolute symbolism of a traditional Scottish industry, the kind of sympathy and empathy that Scots have for Scotland's fishing industry is enormous. And if it looks as if Keir Starmer's selling down the river, it's just another thing that makes it even harder for Anas Sarwar to become First Minister.
But anyway, that is going to be on Monday, so I'm going to be there shouting at them.
And it's amazing that we've gone from NATO being the preeminent cornerstone of defence in Europe to everybody having to find a way past NATO because America's now an unreliable defence partner.
Let's move on to something else. Let's talk about assisted dying, because we've talked about it loads on the pod. But what we haven't discussed is how the law is changing in different parts of the UK and across the British Isles all at the same time. So I think we should do a bit of explain. But also, Ruth, you wrote a piece about this, didn't you, this week?
Yeah, I did. So I've been I was about to say I've been a long-standing supporter of this. Actually, the last time it came to the Scottish Parliament when I was in there was 10 years ago this year. And I voted against it. And it is my biggest regret in politics, without a doubt, 100%. I mean, I'd spent a lot of time, and I'd been up at nights, actually, and I'd spoken to doctors, and I'd spoken to disabled groups, and I'd spoken to people who were terminally ill, and faith groups, and I kind of took a coward's way out because I voted against the way the bill was written, because it wasn't written very well, it wasn't drafted very well, the legislation. So I've kind of voted it down on a technicality rather than letting it get to the committee stage to be whipped into shape. And I've always regretted that. And there is now a bill that passed first reading in Scotland this week. And we can explain to you what that kind of means. But it's just really interesting that it's an idea that kind of looks as if its time has come right across the British Isles, because different parliaments in different areas are all doing different things on it.
Can you help us out here? Can you explain what's happening in England and Wales? And then, Ruth, you could explain what's going on in Scotland.
So what's happening here is that we had the second reading, which is ironically the first outing of a bill in the House of Commons, and it was passed by 55 votes. And that's the House of Commons saying, in principle, we want it to go into a committee to look at the details and to revise it and refine it. And then it comes back to the House of Commons. So we've had the committee stage. And during the committee stage, Kim Leadbitter, who's leading on the bill, changed it to so instead of a judge deciding on each and every individual case where somebody wants assisted dying when they're within 6 months of their own death, that instead it should be a panel rather than an individual judge, a panel, but with a judge overseeing the whole thing. So that was a big substantive change that was brought in committee. Yeah. So the bill, as changed in committee, comes back to what's called report stage in the House of Commons. And at that point, MPs can bring more amendments forward to change the bill. And Kim Leadbitter herself is bringing forward 2 amendments. One, which is to ban advertising, companies advertising, get your assisted dying with us. And she's also, for doctors, she's saying they would have to opt in to providing the assisted dying service rather than opt out. And then it will go to its third reading. Yeah. And if it goes through that, then after that, it goes to the House of Lords, where I'll vote for it, and Ruth will vote for it as well.
Harriet, just on the parliamentary process of this, though, you know, it did pass second reading, But there's quite a lot of noise around at the moment that it might not pass third reading, that there are a number of MPs. You need what? If it's got a majority of 58, what, if 30 MPs change their mind, you might not get a majority.
Well, it's not there yet. And I hope, people will support it. All the arguments are there. But I mean, we'll see what we'll see. But it is a huge, and it will be remembered as one of the huge landmark changes that happened during this period if it goes through. This is really, really big.
And then Ruth, plans to legalise assisted dying in Scotland have also passed this first stage in Holyrood.
So it's the first time in a decade it's come before the Parliament. It's been brought forward again by a private member's bill. No party, similar to the House of Commons, takes a position on this. It's a matter of conscience. Individual MSPs, which is what we call representatives in Holyrood, MSPs, members of the Scottish Parliament, vote according to their conscience on this issue. It was brought forward by the Orkney Liberal Democrat MP, Liam MacArthur, who's also the Deputy Presiding Officer in Scotland, and it's just passed first reading. So this is the first time it's had its big debate on the floor of the Chamber, the first time we've really seen how people vote, and it passed this week by 70 votes to 56. So there's only 14. So in terms of margins, there's only 7 people that need to change their vote one way to the other, and that would wipe out that majority there. But what this means is, a stage 1, you're not saying you want this to be the law, but you're saying that you agree with the principle of the bill. And then the bill goes away to the committee stage and it gets kicked into shape as to what the law would then look like. And you can add amendments at stage, and then it comes back to the Chamber at stage 3, and you can add amendments and all the rest of it. So the hard work on it really sort of starts now.
Well, actually, I think we've got a voice note actually from Liam MacArthur, the Scottish Liberal Democrat MSP who first proposed the bill. So let's have a little listen to what he had to say.
It was obviously an historic moment, but one I think that did the Parliament proud. Much like the second reading debate on Kim Ledbeater's bill in the House of Commons back in November, I think we saw powerful contributions on both sides of the argument, delivered passionately and powerfully, but done in a respectful manner, doing justice to the sensitivity of the issue. I'm feeling pretty tired, but also very proud and obviously delighted that Parliament will now have a chance to look at the detail, consider amendments at stages 2 and 3. Obviously there's a lot of hard work still to be done through the amending phase, and I'm committed to continuing to work with colleagues on the Health Committee, but also MSPs across the Parliament to pick up some of the issues we heard raised in the debate. The time frame for that is perhaps a little difficult to predict. I wouldn't imagine the committee will begin considering amendments until probably after the summer recess. But in the interim, there's probably an opportunity for them to take maybe a bit more evidence, maybe listen to, invite back the Cabinet Secretary for Health, who was unable to give away an awful lot when he appeared earlier in the year at stage 1 because of the neutral stance that the government had taken. So I would imagine they may wish to hear from him.
That was Liam MacArthur. So Ruth, what's your reading? Do you think is it gonna become law? Do you think it's...
Well, actually, weirdly, despite the fact that in Scotland we're very protective of having our own parliament and making sure that we're making our own decisions, I actually think there's going to be quite a lot of influence by what happens with the bill in the House of Commons there, because it's so close, because it only passed first stage 1, 70 votes to 56. So there's only 14 votes in it. Only 7 people need to change their mind. I think if this gets voted down in the House of Commons, I think the reassurance that some people will have that it would be pan-UK and there wouldn't be issues of sort of death tourism, if you like, that sort of thing, will be quite reassuring to people if it passes. I think if it gets voted down in the Commons, I think there's a good chance it'll get voted down in Scotland too. So it's still very much in the balance. The committee will do its very best to make this good legislation, but also just some of the straws in the wind. The First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, Kate Forbes, who are from sort of different ends of their party, both voted against it. The Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, voted against it. And, to have 2 of the 3 big parties, leaders, not supporting it, that would take quite a lot of backbenchers to kind of break with them, even though it's an individual decision. So I still think it's touch and go in Scotland. Also, if they run out of time before the election, you have to start again from the beginning with a private member's bill. It doesn't just hang over. Now, a lot of the work will have been done, and it will have been within a timescale that you're sort of slightly further along the road, but you can't just hang it over because it's a different parliament.
And also, in Jersey, they're currently drafting legislation, so that's one to watch there. But furthest along in all of this is the Isle of Man. In March, they became the first parliament in the British Isles to properly pass assisted dying legislation. Our superb producer has managed to get Dr. Alex Allison, a member of Tynmald, that's the parliament in the Isle of Man, who introduced the private members' bill, to send us in a voice note. So let's hear from Alex.
In March this year, we passed all the various hurdles. We had 7 days of debate on the clauses. We had a committee set up, public consultation. And now the bill has been sent to Westminster for royal assent. Because we are a Crown dependency, our legislation needs to be signed off. And that's part of our constitutional relationship with the UK. Now, our bill very much mirrors some of the ones that were proposed by Lord Falconer in the House of Lords. And that's deliberate, so that they look familiar when they get to the Privy Council. But also, when we were having the debates, the issue of residency came up, because at the time some of the legislation wasn't being advanced as it is now in the United Kingdom, in Britain and in Scotland. And so one of the criteria that was amended was to bring in the fact that you had to be resident on the Isle of Man for over 5 years to actually have an assisted death here. Now, as I said, we're waiting for royal assent. What will then happen is obviously the implementation. And I think that will be the interesting part of the legislation, is getting the right consultation with the doctors, the nurses, the pharmacists, who will actually have to be involved in the operation of assisted dying on the island. We've adopted an opt-in system, so people hopefully can form a team with the right support and training and guidance around there. And we're hoping to be able to bring this in, but it will take consultation. It will take further secondary legislation and regulations coming through our Parliament. And we have all those checks and balances to make sure that when we get our legislation into operation, and I'm hoping we can do that over the next 2 years, it actually suits and fits with the needs of our community on the Isle of Man.
So there's Alex and the sort of process, and he's making the point that we did earlier, wasn't he, that you can pass the legislation and then it takes some time for it to come into effect. I guess the thing that's made me think a bit is that if different parts of the British Isles make different decisions, can people then travel around the British Isles if they want assisted dying and it's allowed in one jurisdiction or another? How does that work?
So what they're doing with the Isle of Man is that they're saying you've got to have lived there for 5 years in order to be able to be eligible for assisted dying.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see if Scotland goes down that route as well. I also have to admit, and you know, I spent my entire political career whanging on about people that don't show any interest or understanding of devolution when it's been a permanent fixture of our country for more than a quarter of a century. And to my eternal shame, I know nothing about the Isle of Man Parliament, nothing about the House of Keys, nothing about what was the name of the Parliament, Tynmald, and I've never sought to learn. So this has been a really good prompt for me to stop being a hypocrite and learn more about Jersey, learn more about the Isle of Man, learn more about the other sort of devolved areas of our nation rather than just England, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It is interesting though, isn't it, that even though the majority of the population are for assisted dying,
overwhelming,
it is so contested in both Westminster and Holyrood as well. I mean, such a narrow margin there as well.
It is quite odd that it's where Parliament is behind where the public are.
I think part of it is because they're private members' bills, and they have to be, because it is about individual sort of belief and choice and matters of conscience when you vote on this. I had a really good experience when I first joined the Lords. So just before you got in there, a couple of years before you got in there, Molly Meacher, Baroness Meacher, brought in a private member's bill on assisted dying, and it was introduced in the Lords rather than the Commons, and we had the debate there as well. And I kind of always in the back of my head, if I'm ever doing a discussion about this or if I'm ever being interviewed about this, I kind of have my Tammy Gray-Thompson moment. So I don't know if you remember, Tammy Gray-Thompson was a fantastic wheelchair athlete, won the London Marathon multiple times. She's now Baroness Gray-Thompson. She's in the House of Lords. And she would never say she speaks on behalf of disabled people, but she always raises disabled people's issues and concerns in the House of Lords and is really cognizant about that. And I think we have to, and is one of the most good faith actors you could possibly meet in terms of being intelligent and articulate and compassionate. She's a wonderful, wonderful human being. And she is violently opposed to this, really strongly opposed to it. And it's always a really good reminder to me that just because somebody disagrees with you does not mean that one or other of you are necessarily wrong. There can be huge shades of grey in a debate, and you can thoroughly respect and admire and understand and empathise with the other person's point of view, even if you disagree with it. And when this sometimes does get heated, and sometimes it does, I always bring myself back to Tanny, because 100% her concerns, her objections, they're grounded in good faith. Now, I happen to not disagree with them, and I believe that agency over end of life is an important part. Having a better death is one of the really big questions that we have. And I passionately believe on the other side. But I absolutely 100% know she's coming from a good faith position. And it's just a really good reminder to me that about how politics can be building consensus within a country without having to fight to the death.
The reason I was just looking down there was because there was a story in the Telegraph sort of questioning whether the bill is going to fall. And this is from some of the team pro the bill, that they're saying that what they think is going on is there's to quote someone, a pretty transparent attempt by opponents of the bill to try to convince MPs that there's a big shift away from support when that simply isn't true. MPs are quite rightly looking at the bill as amended in committee and all extra safeguards as well as new amendments, while opponents are briefing journalists with unsubstantiated claims that the bill is at risk of collapse. And then it goes on to say that Kim Leadbeater and her team are still having detailed and respectful conversations. And I share that just to sort of remind us all that this is very, very contested.
Absolutely.
And actually it is getting very, very political. And the fact that those stories are going on the front of newspapers and then there's a pushback.
Which it was, to be fair, it was at the time of the second reading as well. You know, it got through its second reading, but it's still got to go through its third reading. It's not a done deal by any stretch.
Look, that's all we've got time for, but remember, you can always message us, get on the burner phone. The number to WhatsApp is 07934 200 444, or you can email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. And there's some beanbags down there, so I'm going to go for a little bunker kit before I continue my day.
And remember,
Harriet, look, there's 4. We could have 2 each.
God, I'd go to sleep and I'd never get up again. It looks too cosy. But remember, you can follow us anytime, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you do, you'll get every new episode right away as soon as it's published.
And I'll see you ladies next week. Up to anything exciting this weekend?
Oh, I'm going on Sunday brunch this weekend.
Ooh.
It's 4 on Sunday morning. And basically I turn up and there's like loads of us. And then we just chat and get fed. And drink.
That's not too shabby, is it? I like the sound of that. Nice.
Will you watch it, Harriet? You should come.
I will watch it, unless I'm watching Moana 2, because I've got loads of grandchildren.
Anyway, look, we got to go. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye.